Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Houdini Education Hive. Today we have with us some really excellent presenters, and our next one is ready to get us kicked off. So tell me a little bit about yourself, how you interact with Houdini, and how you teach Houdini, and a little bit about your presentation that you're going to give for us today.
Hey everyone, my name's George, and I've been in the visual effects industry for probably close to 20 years now. I've been using Houdini for about 8 years. I also teach Houdini at Centennial College, and I do some mentorship with students at CG Spectrum. I do a lot of work with Houdini in studio, doing different effects. I do a lot of R&D with it as well. And I'm also involved in the hiring process of artists. So what I've noticed is a bit of a pattern with reels coming in, and some of them are very relevant for VFX and some are not. So I put together a little presentation on something that could potentially help students get the interviews that they want.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. Let's go ahead and get right into it.
All right. Hello and welcome to Entry-Level FX Reel 101. This talk is ideal for someone who's just starting out and they're working on contents for their demo reel, or they've spent the first 2 years working and they're looking to move towards a VFX studio. So I'm going to be showing you some contents to avoid, some contents to include in your demo reel, and basically how to get a little bit more attention so that you can potentially get the job that you want. Before we get too far ahead, let's just talk about the standard demo reel. I'm not asking to completely change it. We should definitely stick to what we're used to doing already, which is putting the best work at the beginning of the demo reel and the best work at the end. You don't want to be artificially putting some fillers to lengthen the reel, because 45 seconds of good solid demo reel is more than good enough. If you must, you can go up to as long as 2 minutes. But to be honest with you, I tend to skim through most demo reels anyway, because I look through too many. And if there's one that I like, then I'll watch the whole thing. You definitely want to get some feedback from your instructors or industry professionals. Ideally, it's someone who has some influence on who should be hired or not. And you definitely want to include some new features from Houdini 19. This is just to show that you're trying to constantly upgrade your skills and be better at what you do. So have a look. You don't need to include everything, but put something there that's fairly new. About the contact info, you don't need anything fancy. All you need is simple contact information so that we can find you. And you put that at the start of your reel and at the end of the reel. And that's it. Let's talk about tutorials. They are for educational purposes only. And I say that because sometimes I have seen demo reels with direct copies of tutorials, and I don't think that's a good idea to do. Also, something to understand is that there's a lot of tutorials made for Houdini. Sometimes it can be actually quite overwhelming to find the right one to watch. So you need to understand that tutorials are made for different kinds of skill sets and also different purposes. Sometimes they're designed to showcase new features. Sometimes it's just designed to create or explain a workflow. And sometimes it's something to generate a very specific look. Maybe it's for fire, water, or something procedural. Other times, the tutorial is part of a workshop or a larger course. Either way, my point is that you need to watch a tutorial that is suited to your skill level. That way, you have time to understand and absorb the material, and you can actually make use of it instead of just copying it directly. And you definitely want to avoid cloning pre-packaged effects and shelf tools. I know it's tempting because you just click a button and you can already make some very cool stuff. But instead of doing that, you should definitely understand the fundamentals inside those shelf tools. I know for myself, if I forget, I tend to look at the shelf tools to remind me how to build something, but then reassemble it with other types of setup so that you can have your own original work. Something I suggest to a lot of my students is to avoid very heavy simulations involving water and fire, because those tend to just show off CPU cycles instead of your skills. You are better off just investing your time and creating something original rather than simming something for 12 hours and who knows if it's even going to work or not. Sometimes you might want to create test shots because you're exploring something or experimenting, which is actually very good to include in your demo reel. The only thing I'll say is that you should not show it out of context, and usually the best way to do that is to show reference footage that you're trying to match to. So now let's talk about references. In the world of visual effects, reference is extremely important. This is something that we receive from production, and sometimes we send them references as well. References, or live action reference, is basically our way of communicating with each other when there is something complicated and difficult to explain. Sometimes our goal is to make a complete replica of the reference, and other times we will mix multiple references together to come up with something. References can usually come in many forms. Sometimes they will come in the form of post-viz, set photography, photogrammetry, LiDAR, and sometimes it's just literally an alternate take of a plate. And sometimes we just don't even get anything at all, and we have to scour the internet for references. Something that students forget is that nowadays everyone has a smartphone. So if you can't find your reference on the internet, then just shoot it yourself, and that could sometimes save you a bunch of time. Matching to reference is actually very important for all of the departments in a visual effects company. And in my experience, any artist that we've hired that has the capability of matching to the reference tends to perform very well. So it doesn't matter if they're an asset artist, a comper, a modeler, or an FX artist, they seem to perform well, at least in my experience. Something I've noticed as well is that in demo reels, I really just don't see enough people showing picture-in-picture reference along with their demo reel. So let's talk a little bit about that. If you want to include reference in your demo reel, it's fairly simple. Just put it at the corner of the screen, just like what you see here. Sometimes you have more than one, so split them up. And if you have even more, then cover the whole bottom part of the screen with your references. The whole goal here is to be able to match the reference exactly how it is, with timing, color, shape, behavior, speed. It really depends on the effect you're going for. And you definitely, once again, want to avoid cloning tutorials. In some cases, you might be setting up something complex, and whenever you do something like that, you probably went through multiple tutorials to figure out how to do it. Whenever you're doing anything like that, it's a good idea to show iterations of your process and also the wedging system you use to come up with that effect. Sometimes it takes a little bit more effort to come up with a contact sheet so that you can show off all the different layers that you created to come up with the effect. Remember that this is how we do things in production. So if you can show this in your demo reel, then that is a big bonus already. And before we leave this topic, something I like to bring up is to not forget to show your effects integrated on a live action plate. You want to do this because you want to show the ability to create polished work and something that's actually production ready. It also shows your ability to render, light, and integrate your simulated elements. And it also shows that you understand the entire VFX pipeline from start to finish. Not everything has to be an explosion, a spaceship, or a robot. And I only say that because in the past couple of years, this kind of content is what I see the most in student demo reels. So if you don't have to do these, or you're somehow gravitated towards making this type of content, I would try to encourage you to be a little bit more creative and come up with something else. In fact, this is the best time to be a little bit more creative with what you do. So come up with something different. Something I like to bring up is that in visual effects, a lot of the work we do is actually falling under the category of invisible effects. And these are the type of things that you might not notice was actually added to the shot. So just some very simple examples here is that maybe you can add some falling leaves using Vellum or particle systems, or snowflakes in a shot. Typical use for it is, depending on the project, of course, is to add a cape on a character. Maybe you're going to do some sort of time-lapse effect, some aging or de-aging or deterioration. And one of the best uses is, of course, coming up with an alternate solution for something that might be very costly or impossible to shoot with a practical camera or practical effects. So a good example of that is adding some damage to something that might be expensive. So breaking glass, shattering wood, bricks or walls. Sometimes you might want to create some hazardous materials that would be impossible for somebody to handle. So those are just a couple examples of what you can do for invisible effects. Heavy flip tanks, pyrosims, and weeks of R&D work tend to go to senior effects artists anyway, so you don't necessarily have to have it in your demo reel. If you have the resources to do it and the capability to do it and to do it well, then sure, add it in, but you really don't have to. I would rather you spend your time wisely and focus on some very high quality particles, RBD, Vellum, and procedural effects, because these things are not so computationally heavy, and it's something that you can just do at home with a free license of Houdini. Something I've also noticed in the last couple of years is that Vellum is very much underutilized by students and new grads. And it's a tool that we've used on every single project ever since it's been released. So once again, Vellum is amazing. You should really include that in your reel more. You also want to show the ability to attach Vellum effects to creatures and animated characters, because that is something that is very typical to do in a production line. Don't forget that it's a good idea to add procedural effects. Maybe you want to procedurally generate a building, and maybe you want to take this part as an opportunity to create an abstract effect. Just make sure that you don't go too out of context and whatever you're doing still makes sense and is presentable. It's a good idea to always showcase your ability to make quick changes and precise adjustments on the stuff that you're making. The next topic here is simplifying the simulations and focusing on realism instead. So this is another thing I find that students are always trying to do with their work and projects, and it is covering the entire screen with CGI. So I would say that's generally a bad idea, because CG has always been meant to supplement cinematography, the story, and the practical elements that already exist in the film. It is not meant to replace it. As soon as you decide to cover the entire screen with your CGI, it means that you're now taking on the job of all those on-set people. Once again, you're better off focusing on high-quality visual effects that is a little bit more contained. What I would recommend is start very small, maybe a cigarette smoke, or maybe adding some flames to a candle. And as you get better and better at creating all these simulations and rendering, then you can have larger and larger effects cover the screen. A couple examples for flip tanks and liquid sims. Actually, a really good example for it is doing blood enhancement and blood spatter types of effects. Those are something that we do a lot, and it's actually quite difficult to do with practical tools. Once again, Vellum is super useful. It's great for doing cloth sims, any type of jiggling actions, and it's great for simulating dirt, sand, and anything that is granular. As far as procedural setups, this is, once again, a good opportunity to do something unique and a way to show that you can procedurally generate something that might be difficult to do in a non-procedural program. One thing I always suggest is to create an HDA and break it down a little bit and show what you can do with that tool. The next topic here is team collaboration. This is definitely a missing skill set from a lot of recent grads, and it is actually a very tricky topic. And I say that because coordinating a group project for schools is very difficult. And that is coming from someone who teaches Houdini, like myself. Usually the group project tends to be imbalanced when it comes to distributing work to different kinds of artists. Let's just have a look here with my little diagram. On the left side is your typical student workflow where you start off with one program, maybe you do a bit of shading, you do your Houdini simulation, you render it, and then you comp, and then you're done. So it is a fairly linear motion from start to finish. But when it comes to production work, it's not like that at all. The work comes from multiple people, textured and shaded by multiple people. They all go into Houdini at some point, maybe, and then they get rendered by multiple people, and then they all get assembled in a compositing program. And then at any point here, it might go back to the previous department for more fixes. So the only way you can be successful in a group setting is to be very organized, be very good at communicating with your team, and be a good team player. Anyway, working through a basic pipeline will really help you up your skills and be job ready once you're ready to work in a studio. So what I recommend is to reach out to instructors, professors, and maybe your program coordinator and come up with a plan to try to do some sort of group collaboration so that you can be exposed to a little bit of what I'm talking about here. Now let's talk about free online resources. I feel like this is a little bit underutilized as well. Like I said here, don't reinvent the wheel because many of these things already exist. So something you can do is to use the Tears of Steel 4K EXR plates. These are free to download. You just have to figure out how to download them. A lot of compers are already using these plates, but FX artists can use them as well. They're high quality and it's as close as you can get to working with production level plates. If those are too much trouble, then find some other site where you can download some plates. One I recommend is Pexels because there's a lot of plates there that you can use for effects. Maybe you can use some scattering techniques or your pyro skills to enhance the plate in some way or another. Polyhaven is an excellent website for HDRI, textures, and models. This will save you a ton of time if you don't have the resources to make these yourselves, but these models, textures, and HDRs are pretty much ready for you to use. An excellent resource for characters and animations that are ideal for testing water and vellum and maybe even some fire is Mixamo. So go over there and download some of this work for some experimentation purposes. Let's not forget Megascans. There's some very high quality scans here that's been retopologized so that they are render ready. Check it out. There's a lot of resources there. I think most of them are free. If not, it's for a fairly low cost. Now let's talk about documents. I'm personally not a huge fan of watching videos, so one of my favorite websites is CG Wiki because I can control search for something specific. There's also animated GIFs so that I can see the explanation fairly quickly, and there's Houdini files supplied with all the examples so that I can assemble and study whatever is happening in the description. If you're feeling adventurous, you can check out entagma.com. There's a lot of procedural effects here that might be useful to you. They are a little bit more on the advanced side, but if you're feeling pretty good about Houdini, I would also recommend checking out this site. And last but not least, we have sideeffects.com/tutorials. There is a large collection of tutorials here. You sort of don't want to do all of them at the same time because you will feel overwhelmed. Take your time, study them, and make something for yourself. All right, let's summarize this talk. The first two are the most important, so let's highlight them in red. Use picture-in-picture live action references in your demo reel and aim for photorealism. Production experience and group collaborations are missing from many training programs, so make sure you expose yourself to something like that if possible. Use tutorials for educational purposes only. Don't make a direct copy of a tutorial. Try to be a little bit more original. It's a good idea to show breakdowns, wedge simulations, and iterations of your process. Integrated and visual effects are important too, so don't forget to do them. And let's have less explosions and more vellum and procedural effects. Make good use of the free online resources to save a lot of time. And last but not least, keep your demo reel short and simple. So that pretty much concludes my talk. I hope this is helpful to all of you, and I hope to see some demo reels in the future that is better suited for visual effects work. Thank you.